think it's the human aspect of leadership that sometimes we underestimate just how much it needs to be learned.
But many managers or leaders don't necessarily have that natural ability. So they need leadership enablement that can help them with some tools and some methods.
There are many problems that have arisen over the, 30, 40 years where leadership development has been a thing.
Good day. Welcome to Inspired Conversations. This is an inspired leadership podcast where we have open and honest conversations about life and leadership. Not just the theory of leadership, but the actual reality and the workings of it in day-to-day life. I'm Tendai Chitapi, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we will bring together thoughtful leaders to explore the realities of leadership today, the decisions, the tensions, and the human experience behind it all. Today's conversation is on a topic that many organizations say they value, but often struggle to realize and practice. The idea that leadership is not just training in an organization, but a critical strategic lever. I'm joined today by the founder of Inspired Leadership, Angela. Welcome.
Thank you, Tendai.
And one of the senior facilitators in the Inspired Leadership universe, Ocea.
Hi, Tendai. Hi, Angela.
I want to just take a moment before we get into the nitty-gritties to start a little bit more personally and understand your journey in leadership to this point. What experience has shaped how each of you thinks about leadership today? Angela, maybe you have to go first.
I'm actually going to take that and put it a little bit on its head. I was thinking about Ocea and going, it would be very interesting, because we've known each other a long time, for me to reflect on Ocea as a leader, because she has been a formative force in my own journey. And maybe that will give some context as to the relationship that we have as well as the background. And she could probably do the reverse, because we have known each other some time. So we used to work together in IBM, but in very different places in the business. I was in the HR, human capital development, leadership development, and Ocea was working in the business in running a business unit and running a big team. And yet we kept joining each other in certain spaces because I'd be facilitating workshops and events and people management and people leadership, and there Ocea would be front and center, absorbing everything, playing an active role, contributing above and beyond, and also role modeling what leadership looked like in the workplace. And not everybody did that. Some people occupied the role as a function and were effective in executing the function of leadership. But what differentiated Ocea and some of her peers, and I can think of them in my head, as she can too, was the intentionality behind unlocking and unleashing the performance in other people. It wasn't about her, and it never was about her. It was always about how can I get the most out of other people and figure out what makes them work, makes them tick, and create an environment for them to perform. And that, for me, is what leadership is about. I think further to join the dots to where we are today, when Ocea had an opportunity to, after working abroad and working all over the world and running big technical teams and so on, she had a season change in her life, which gave her the opportunity to join in what I was doing in Inspired Leadership as literally the first person to join me in this quest. And for that, I'm forever grateful. But she was able to join in a world that she was already equipped for from a practical experience. And we've been able to leverage that practical experience and the passion and the energy and the commitment to people through the Inspired Leadership approach and methodology.
Wonderful. And Ocea, what's been your leadership journey?
Yeah, so if I flip it over then to say, for me, I think some people do have natural leadership. So we were just, you can show up and you can, know what to do. You care about people, so you will just put them first. But many managers or leaders don't necessarily have that natural ability. So they need leadership enablement that can help them with some tools and some methods. And that's what I used to love about going to Angela's sessions, was it gave me the methods to even show other people how to be a good leader.
Yeah.
And to reinforce some of the things I was doing naturally with some nice tools and frameworks and that kind of thing. So I think that there's no ways I could have curated the beautiful journeys that we have.
Yeah.
But I love that it gives me a natural flow as to what a leader should be doing. And it's sort of instinctive then.
Yeah.
But it helps other people where it's not instinctive to find a way to become a good leader.
Absolutely.
Because, we believe that leaders are not necessarily born, they can also be made. And so we go on this journey with helping them to become better leaders through the process.
Awesome. One of the things that I've really come to understand quite deeply is that leadership is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned. The idea that you have sort of introduced that, some people are naturally gifted in leadership, just as some people are naturally gifted in music and naturally gifted in any other of range of technical skills. But I think it's the human aspect of leadership that sometimes we underestimate just how much it needs to be learned and honed and like a muscle, trained and worked. So thank you for both introducing one another's sort of shared experience. I think that was really quite lovely. So moving into, I think, some of the more sort of outward-facing parts of what we're seeing in leadership. We take very seriously, I think, and I've learned this from the inspired methodology, that better humans make better people, but also better leaders make better people, and better people make better leaders. It's a sort of a circle of virtue, right? And when we look at leadership development at an organizational level, what do you actually see in organizations?
This might be an answer to the question, or it might just be my thinking around the organization's responsibility in the broader societal context.
Yes.
Because I really do believe, particularly in South Africa, but I'm sure the same is the case across the world, where organizations have a duty of care over their people, but they also have a responsibility to do more than create a profit. In order for business to stay in the business of business, it needs to be profitable. But when it is in the business of business, there's a duty of serving the context in which it serves, or the community in which it serves. And by that I mean to create leaders in an organization. They are not for the organization. They take their leadership capability into the community that they're part of, which means their family, which means their broader community, the society that they're in. So an organization can make a difference to the world, even if they're building widgets. And the widget itself is only used inside the little stumpy thing that sits underneath a chair. They can still make a difference to the world through enabling people to be better leaders. And an example, I'll give you an example of what that has looked like in our context is in Inspired Leadership, Emerging Leaders, and various of our other journeys, we help people hold productive conflict conversations. And that has reaped huge benefits in the workplace, but equally so in people's families and in their marriages and in their contexts around going home when you're locally, you live locally in Durban, and then you have to go to the Transkei where you have a home, and suddenly the rules are different, and you actually don't want to adopt those rules because you live a different life in Durban, and you have to hold a difficult conversation with your family, and now you have skills to do that. You're not offending, you're just respectfully giving people different news that they weren't expecting.
That's good. And Osha, one of the things that I'm seeing, just building on Angela's point, that the development of leaders in an organization is not just for the organization, but actually there's this ripple effect in terms of the impact beyond you are very much, I think, at the front end and the core face. Always one of the things I was really thinking about when we were sort of preparing this was just the perspective that you bring as sort of the creative source of what we do at Inspired Leadership. You don't always get to see what happens at the delivery, at the core face, and you are always at that interface. And so I'd be interested to hear your sense and your thoughts around what you are seeing on the ground. We talk about leadership development, and I think a lot of organizations have a lot to say about it. But what are you actually seeing on the ground?
So I can tell you that I get a lot of feedback from the participants on the impact that it's having at home or in their communities. And that's always so rewarding. I'm working with some people that have been managers for 25 years, for example, and they learned their leadership style in the army, right? So they have been very much, I tell people what to do. And suddenly they come on Inspired Leadership and they learn, no, self-awareness is, okay, you might be aware that you have a commanding style and maybe even a temper, but EQ says I can control that. So I can show up differently to get a different outcome. And suddenly they just have this massive aha after 25 years of leadership. So the manager to leader thing is really quite real. And then they'll tell me, my wife wants to phone and thank you because she has been trying to tell me that for 25 years. So they take these messages home and it resonates with the family.
That's awesome.
Some people are taking some of our reflective moments and doing it as a family around the dining room table, going around the room and asking people to reflect on what are you grateful for?
Yeah.
Because that's one of our exercises, helping people to be more mindful. The one guy is, taking his shoes off and walking on the grass now and playing with his dogs between meetings, So people are really applying this both at work and at home. And then they're coming back to work more empowered and more ready to be good leaders. So the stories have been amazing, of people just sharing how this is just blowing them out of their families as well.
That's really awesome. And, I like how we are taking a look at the impact. We're seeing the value of high quality leadership learning, which we value. And I think we've got, you've developed a very robust system around it. But if we take a step back and look at what, the problem that we are sort of aiming to solve through Inspired Leadership, where the long-term nature of our philosophy around leadership development has not necessarily been the way that it has always been done. I'd love to get your thoughts on how did we get to this point? What is it that you saw, that you witnessed, that led you to think there must be a better way? How did we get here?
This is really critical to the story of Inspired Leadership and what led me to try and solve the problems that I experienced and I created. So I acknowledge I have been part of the problem. Working inside big corporate, delivering the 3-day class, having a pumped up group of managers who then walk back into the business and have no accountability, almost no way to measure the impact of whether that's actually doing anything. And a stop-start approach to development. There are many problems that have arisen over the, 30, 40 years where leadership development has been a thing. I think the stop-start nature is something I've personally experienced where the leadership development or the learning and development organization starts a great initiative, and because the organization then changes direction or goes through a restructure, internal L&D are left holding like a dead thing because now the energy's flowed away from the thing that they started and it's gone on to a new bright shiny object. So that in itself is an issue because you have learning that then has almost limited or no credibility because we keep starting stuff but we don't finish it. And as a result, you can't measure the impact of the learning. You can't ever see a measurable impact because you don't get to finish it or you don't do it long enough to see that return. That's a problem. Another problem that existed, and I've been part of this problem, is organizations will grab onto the latest bright, shiny object, whatever is loudest in the world. And I'm not going to name names, but people will get certified on a thing. And then they're making a big thing about the thing that they're certified on. And then the organizations that they are networked in will run their 1 day this or their 2 day that. And that's it. They've done Apple leadership for 2 days, and all their managers did Apple leadership, and then it's finished. And then next year they've got a new budget. So then they do lemon leadership. And there's no connection to Apple because the following year it's peanuts and raisins leadership. There's no connection. So it's disconnected. And I mean, I can go on this. I can keep going on this.
Absolutely.
But I guess the one that I'm the most sensitive to, and possibly an explanation as to why I do what I do and what Ocea does what she does and you do what you do, is because I know this might come as a shock, but I'm actually quite funny and entertaining at the front of a room. And I can hold a class for 3 days, no problem. It's actually quite fun. I enjoy it. Everyone enjoys it. It's highly energizing. But then everyone is on the Angela train. And they go at the pace that's right for me. My English is quite fluent and fast. And if you're second language English, sorry for you. And if you are maybe got a different processing speed, sorry for you, because you're on the Angela train. If you want to stop and pause and think about something more deeply, sorry for you, you're on the Angela train. And so we're going at the pace that's according to me. And because I've done this for so long, I realized that actually that's totally faulted logic. We are so different in our thinking and our approaches and the way we learn and how we interpret language and experience and pace and place, that's not effective. I mean, we're putting people through a whole education system based on that method, but really, is it effective? So those are the kind of problems, and there are more, but those are the kind of problems that I was trying to solve for, and I had the opportunity to when I left big corporate and moved into independent consulting and creation. And when I started, we only started to solve the problems with a methodology at a particular level. And the biggest problem for me, the one where I kind of had my heart, I guess, was the fact that managers are often set up to fail. First-line managers, they're the ham in the sandwich. They're often undervalued, underappreciated, have got a very hard job, and are highly influential on how people feel about their work. They either give of their best because they've got a great Ocea as their manager, or they give a marginal attempt because they've got Bob. Sorry, all Bobs that are listening, but not everyone gets to have Ocea as a manager. So you also get lots of Bobs. And yet when I have Bob as my manager, I go home and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got such an idiot as a manager. You mumble, grumble, you lose your oomph, you just show up and you do your minimum. So how can we help Bob to learn to unlock the potential and use the skills that come naturally to Ocea, but he doesn't have them. But he's in the role. It's too late. Like, can't go, oh, sorry, Bob, you're useless. Put him out the door. You actually need to equip Bob. That's the organization promoted him. The organization must equip him so that we can reward him and see the performance in his team. So my heart was for managers initially. And because I come from a technical background, well, not me personally, but the organization, it's looking at those technical specialists who are brilliant technically and have put all their time and effort to be great coders or great developers or great software engineers or whatever it is, and not any time thinking about, well, I think I'll just read Simon Sinek's Infinite Game on the weekend. Then I'll scroll through some Brené Brown, when I'm bored. They're not doing that. So they aren't thinking intuitively about leadership. We need to help them think like that so that we put them into a position of leadership over others, whether it's a client, whether it's a project, whether it's a resource group in the workplace, with some skill. And then they can perform in a more effective way.
That's really good. Thank you. And you touched on something so critical, this idea of leadership thinking. One question that I'm often that I encounter quite regularly with leaders in business is, how do I get my people to think like me? And I say, look, you'll never get them to think like you, because if they thought like you, they would have created this business that you've created. But you can teach them to learn about accountability and to take ownership. And that leadership thinking, as you've rightly said, is what we try and put out into the world to equip. Ocea, I'm curious to know, Angela has alluded to the fact that in the absence of a organizational reality that moves side by side with intentional leadership training, that managers are effectively set up to fail. What have you experienced on that particular aspect? And I think, same question is from your journey and what you've experienced at the coalface. How did we get to that place?
So I think it wasn't necessarily that we set people up for failure, but sometimes what got you here won't get you there. So we take them, the best technical person, and we say, as your reward, we're going to make you a leader. And now they are ill-equipped to take that journey. So it's not that we really wanted them to fail. We wanted them to succeed. But what got them to that point of being successful was hard work, technical skill and experience. And then the organization doesn't give them the learning that can teach them how to be a good leader. So it leaves them there with their highly technical ability, which is now also lost to the organization, by the way, because they're not supposed to be doing the technical work anymore. And yet they're not equipping them. So many organizations are very good at keeping the technical skills up to date. The vendors insist on certifications and badges and all kinds of things to keep the technical skill going. And then we throw them into leadership and we expect that they're going to be able to make that translation, that I'm no longer the doer. I now have to lead the doers.
Yes.
Simon Sinek says, we don't even know the game we're in. We don't realize we are not the ones doing the work anymore. We are now caring for the people doing the work. So it's a huge switch that is necessary.
Yeah.
Just to give you my perspective on your previous question of how did we get here, was when I was a leader in big organizations, I would send my people off because I did believe in leadership training and I had Angela there and others. So I'd send them off to her wonderful courses for 2 days. But I had no idea what they were learning in those 2 days. I had no way of harnessing back the value of what they were learning. So they came back to 1,000 unread emails, and off they went. And all of that wonderful learning for, fire hose for 2 days was lost. I'd been on some of those courses. I knew they were fabulous and taught you wonderful things, but we only can take in 14 in a day. And when we come back to the office, we lose a lot of that. So what I love about this approach and the design that Andrew came up with is how do we make people apply what they're learning on a slow basis, a drip feed basis, so that it brings about real change. So, if we teach them about having a difficult conversation, they need to go and have a few difficult conversations in that month. And I was working with one organization where we actually had several groups going at the same time. So we had a few manager groups and a few emerging leader groups, and they all got to module 3 at the same time, which was about conflict management. Well, this workplace was explosive for a month because all the repression of months and years came out in these courageous conversations that we taught them how to have. But literally, it meant that good came of that because they learned how to hold those conversations instead of holding them in, and suddenly they could move forward and work better going forward. So I love the fact that there's time for application, and there's also chance for me as the leader, whether I've sent my people off on this, to understand what are they learning about. So how can I help them to practice some of that? If you tell me my people are learning about courageous conversations and I see in a meeting that my person is completely avoiding some, I can say, I know that you're learning about this. What was the method? How could you have brought that to that meeting? So the having the manager of the people involved, for me was the biggest change, which I wish I'd had when I was a manager. So, help, being able to harness back that learning and even help the people to do the application of the learning.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing and what I think you're speaking about is a leadership system as opposed to intervention-based and training-based approach to leadership. Because I think what often happens in the way that many organizations approach leadership development currently is that they send people off, as you have rightly alluded to, both of you. They get energized, they get these new tools, but then they come back and the system itself, the organization itself, has no context has no systemic reality that can connect with what they've learned in that training. And so it's high energy for a few days, but then there's no way to apply it because, as you said, they come back to 1,000 unread emails because, again, systemically, the organization has not set itself up that when our people are learning, that they come back to apply. We give them the room. I've been involved in many sort of sessions in other work where people are like, I'm not really able to focus because I'm thinking about my deadlines. And some of them, sometimes when it's virtual sessions, you can say, my phone is pinging. Yeah, we're trying to have this, but we can't because they've sent us here, but they haven't really given us the full sort of capability of being fully present. And so without that, there's that disconnect between what the organization purports to be wanting to achieve and what they actually, the difference between what actually then happens in reality. You mentioned that this idea of technical capability of what got you here won't get you there, and the shift that is required once people who have gotten used to delivering results on their own now have to deliver results through other people. And now we're moving into the territory of the strategic reality, where we have to then question, the strategic reality or truth behind organizations who say they realize that leadership development is critical. Okay, so that understanding is there. In practice, it doesn't seem to be what unfolds. Do you think that leadership development is truly treated as a strategy, or is it just something that we say? Is it just lip service?
I think in some organizations it really is lip service because it's driven by a compliance method. So it's about points, it's about compliance, it's about checking boxes and making sure our numbers reflect that we're doing something on the people agenda. We don't fit well with those organizations because we're not about numbers. We work really well with organizations and we have these people as clients where the senior person, the CEO, the divisional director, whatever it is themselves personally committed. So they have already, I think they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They themselves, as the CEO, are going, I know this is important. I can see the connection between the manager's role and employee engagement and business results. I can see that connect. And I've done enough of my own head work and my own knowledge base to go, I get that this is crucial for my business. We might be a manufacturing business, we might be a technology business, but we actually are a people business. And if we can learn how to unlock the best in our people, we will drive a better business. So those are the organizations who know why it's important. They just don't know how to do this, how to create the system of leadership, how to take the strategy and turn it into a system. Yeah. And that's where we can play a very active and partnering role. And not for today, not for tomorrow. It's for the next few years, because you don't turn a strategy into a system by checking a box. You turn it into a system by doing it sustainably over time with that succession over time. It's not a quick fix. It's a long-term partnership.
It's the long game, right?
It's the long game.
Long-term behavior change.
Yeah.
And, building on that, the question then, you talked about rewards. We promote managers without fully equipping them to lead. And then how are we rewarding them? What is then the reward and incentive structure? Is it tied to the critical realities of what leadership really entails, or is it still numbers and targets? Because those are sometimes and often contradicting each other. What the strategy requires and what leadership entails in any given moment.
And I think that's important, that we don't start to give the world outside the impression that this is pink and fluffy, that we're just asking people to be nice. That is not the outcome of leadership development. The outcome of leadership development is business performance.
100%.
So if the work that we do and the partnerships that we have don't result in improved business performance, then we're not doing a job that's worthwhile. People who are performing at their best because their managers are better, or their leadership is more effective, should get better results. They just shouldn't feel better. We're not here to make happy workplaces. We're here to get effective workplaces that are performing well and people can flourish and there's thriving and there's results that people are proud of. They feel connected to the organization's purpose and mission. That unlocks real value in an organization. I'm not overly concerned about whether people are happy. Happiness is an emotion that is very much based on whether you got cupcakes today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important, I think, as you said, to highlight the fact that this is it's a deep skill and requires often a lot of deep digging in terms of excavating, self-awareness and ego. And I think there's an individual aspect to that, and an organizational aspect to that. And Ocea, maybe I can just get your thoughts on this. What do you see as being the biggest gap between intention and reality when organizations are purporting to want to establish leadership as a culture, but then, what do they really reward? What are the incentives? Where is that gap in practice?
Yeah, to me, it is the senior leadership, believing in this approach and supporting it and allowing it. Because where we have seen it not be successful is where we are working at a level where people feel like, I can't do all of these things you're teaching me because my senior leadership is stopping me from doing them, not rewarding them, discouraging them. So for me, the senior sponsorship is really important. And then what we found is many times if we're working at a lower level, people will say, I wish my manager was on this course. And then we go in and we sell it to the higher level. And you've also been in that circumstance. So we go in at the higher level and now we can really get good results. Now we're even, Angela had developed a new program because we even need to go right up to the C level, right? Because if we're only working down here, the tail can try and wag the dog, but we're not going to be as effective. So, I think it's that systemic approach where everybody from the senior leadership down believes in the program and is actually being touched by the programs so that everybody's working together to create a new culture that is a learning culture that results in fantastic business results.
Yeah.
If we've only got one layer we're working at, it's not as effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've alluded to this, and I'm really interested to explore this. You said that senior sponsorship is a critical hurdle that needs to be cleared in terms of what gets in the way. If we were to truly unlock leadership as strategy, what would need to change?
So my take on that as a short answer is very often leadership development or training is in the portfolio of human capital, or also known as human resources. And sometimes HR functions in organizations aren't valued. And that can be because of the person occupying the seat and the skills level that they bring, the fact that they often get stuck in order taker, compliance police, or just swamped with too many responsibilities. Anything that's got two legs and two arms suddenly becomes the portfolio of human resources, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of stuff. So HR generally is wildly overwhelmed and as a result can't be excellent at everything. Another factor around HR, and I am part of the HR community, so these are my people, is that HR in organizations is a generalist function. It is very seldom that you have a specialist in leadership development inside a medium-sized organization. That is the purview of the global giants. And it's like going to the GP. You go to the GP and they can give you an antibiotic, and then they will say, I really think you need to go and see an ENT. It's the specialist, because they have got a generalist knowledge about a lot, but when it comes to the specialist crystals in your ear and how they fell out when you hit your head, that's ENT territory. They don't know how to advise you. So leadership development is a specialist function within HR. So when we let it live and be driven by HR at a generalist business partner or HR manager level without specialists involved, it can devalue its impact. And it can be a tick in the box, or not even existing, or very haphazard. When it is driven and owned by your C-suite, or you have a strong, influential advocate within the C-suite who's saying, I can see how this can be an enabler of our strategy. I'm putting my back into it. I'm going to make things happen and shift the culture. With HR as the enabler, we have a very different impact. And we've worked in organizations with both, with some extremely strategic HR people.
Yeah.
They do the groundwork, and then they go to the CEO and say, I think I've got what we need. And that we'll sit there with the C-suite and talk them through it. And there's buy-in and there's support. And is the acknowledgement of, let's just not throw it over the wall and HR is just going to execute.
Yeah.
Not like that. Inspired leadership is about us. It is us as the provider and HR and the manager and the executives. We are all responsible for learning and creating this culture. It's not something that we can do on the side by ourselves.
Yeah.
So culture is all hands on deck. Everybody needs to be in the boat, all rowing in the same direction. We create the rhythm, we create the structure, we help make that happen. But everyone got to pick up an oar.
That's brilliant. And I think, what you alluded to around HR, I think oftentimes being undermined or overwhelmed, given its generalist nature, they either do not have the capacity or the capability to get into the specialist territory of teaching people how to lead. And so that specialist capability, as you said, is the purview of the big organizations. We found, I think, that high growth organizations, particularly medium-sized, very technical environments, the generalists are given way more responsibility than they are equipped to handle. And so the specialist capability that we bring as Inspired, or in really capable leadership development partner, becomes a critical strategic lever for the business. And, Ocea, I'd like to get your thoughts on, you have, I think, come with the more technical trajectory into this work. And with where you see the change, some of which you've alluded to, some of the testimonials and anecdotes that you've shared, how has your experience in this work, in Inspired specifically, but more broadly, how has it shaped the way you see and think about leadership development now?
It's given me hope, to be honest, because I think partly when I was in the corporates, I really just tried to be the manager that I wished I'd had. And I never very often didn't have it, right? Because they were, sales leaders and had to cadence and, push for results, and we're not particularly people oriented, right? So finding a way now where we can actually get to people, even a technical person that didn't have a natural people skill, and show them how caring for the person is what can make the difference. And the discretionary leadership that we teach is you don't just treat everybody the same. You bring people's strengths in to get the best results. So that sort of team dynamic approach where a good leader then learns how to read their people and bring in their different strengths to get results. So this has given me hope, because I've now worked across lots of organizations, and many of them that had exactly the same problems that I'd come from, and see how this kind of systemic approach can change an organization and can suddenly now make all of these leaders more effective, and as a result have more effective teams.
Yeah.
So I think it's made me more hopeful.
That's awesome. And I think you've given a beautiful segue into sort of how we can look at the road ahead through a lens of hope. Angela, in spite of, I think, what has been a rocky trajectory in the corporate world, arriving at a place where serious questions are being asked and serious consideration is being given to the importance of intentional and strategic leadership development. Ocea says that her experience has given her hope. And I guess my question to you would be, what gives you hope when you look at leadership today?
I think in the times that we are in now, it's even more important to lean into what makes us distinctly human, which is our capacity for understanding, for differentiation, for noticing and valuing individual contributions. These are the human skills that differentiate us as a species. When we are in competition for our livelihood and having to go, how do I equip myself for the next wave, whatever that looks like? I think organizations and individuals are well positioned to be doubling down on their effective communication, their ability to hold robust, meaningful conversations, to have inclusive decision-making processes, to think about well-being in a very different way, to balance accountability with compassion. And these are all leadership elements that are part of inspired leadership. And that gives me hope because, A, it's something that we know how to do. So we have a meaningful way that organizations can tap into, and individuals as well. But it means that we will continue to be able to do the work that we love, and it's meaningful, and it makes a difference, not just in organizations, but in the world at large.
Yeah. Because
better people start in organizations as better leaders.
You've alluded to the state of the world today. And when we look around, it feels like there is global dysfunction in leadership. It is a very, scary time. And I think the need for our humanity to shine through and shine brightly has never been more acute. So I think my final invitation or reflection would be to share something that you believe so strongly about leadership, but that you think many organizations still misunderstand. What would be your grounding invitation, if I can put it that way? What would be your grounding? What is it that you believe, that you think organizations, about leadership in particular, that you think organizations still misunderstand, which if they just could get this right, that it could turn the tide?
So I have a motto of rise to your best you. So that is my passion, is to help each individual rise to their best potential. And if that happens, it can only be good for the organization and the world, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that is what leadership is about, is helping. It's not about me as the facilitator or even Angela who created the program. It's about each individual rising to their best, and that us, as we rise up, lift as we rise. So to me, those are my passions, and that's what drives me. That's my purpose, and that's why I love what I do here, because that's what I see is people rising up to their best potential.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all boats. Say, Angelo, what is it that you believe deeply that you think organizations still misunderstand, which if they got it, really might turn the needle on the world really becoming a better place?
I'm actually reasonably frequently asked, what is the most important leadership skill? And people can debate me, but I really believe that being an effective listener is the catalyst for leadership. Because if we listened more to people's ideas, they would feel noticed and valued. And we might be able to understand that, yes, maybe it does sound a little bit like something we've tried before, but let me just probe and reflect back and clarify and realize, actually, this is coming from a totally different place. And in that, I'm creating space for innovation. And it is individuals' ideas shaped by their context and their experience that's going to lead to innovation in organizations that are currently sitting deers in headlight.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we do this? And it is the job of a leader to create that space where that listening, that curiosity, that space for innovation can be created literally by one person holding the room.
That's really so true. And I find that, the data has also borne out the fact that when people feel seen and heard and valued, that actual commercial, operational performance metrics improve across the board. Because there's this idea that if you introduce care and empathy and listening, you're going to create soft organizations, when in fact the data shows quite the opposite. That, we're seeing this shift into this idea of organizations and systems and a way of being, especially now with, again, some of the very fear-based systems in which we are finding ourselves caught up in, that spaces for love and care and belonging. When you use words like love and care and belonging in organizations, they're like, what are you trying to do to my organization? But actually, when people feel that they belong, when people feel like they're listened to, you unlock that best self. You unlock the innovation, the creativity, which then has got downstream effects on business results. And I'm really encouraged. I'm very hopeful myself with everything that I am seeing in terms of people taking a second thought around how do we actually create leadership as a culture rather than this intervention-based, training-based. Because I think people are starting to see that this is how you truly can create sustainability as your organization grows. On that note, I'd like to thank you both. I think this has been a really thoughtful and reflective conversation. Thank you for bringing your full selves and your open and honest perspectives. And thank you to everyone for listening. This has been Inspired Conversations, where we explore leadership and life through honest dialogue. Thank you both.